Sometimes, a seemingly ordinary flight becomes the starting point for great change. And sometimes, justice comes not with shouting, but with strong silence. Atlanta International Airport, a spring afternoon like any other. The soft sunlight filtered through the giant glass windows, illuminating the rows of luxurious brown leather seats in the first-class waiting area. The passengers were neatly dressed, all of them looking busy. Some were bent over their laptops with spreadsheets open, others were whispering into their phones in the tone of a director. Everything was quiet, very proper, and perhaps for many people here, this was normal order. In the right corner near the boarding gate, an elderly man was sipping black coffee, flipping through a newspaper. His face was wrinkled with age, but his eyes were still sharp. It was Mr. Jonathan Blake, 55, a veteran businessman in the construction industry. He had flown thousands of flights across the country, and for him, first class was his office in the air. Not far away, an elderly couple, Mr. and Mrs. Raymond, in their early 70s. They were dressed in classic clothes, wool coats, scarves, and old-fashioned leather suitcases. They talked softly, holding each other's hands, a habit they had picked up since the 70s. There was something very old-fashioned American about them, respect, politeness, and a little prejudice. The loudspeaker rang out, "First-class passengers on Flight 612 from Atlanta to New York, please board via Gate 3, passengers stood up one by one. The atmosphere was solemn and orderly. Like a party where everyone knew their role. And then, a woman appeared, changing the rhythm of the room, Naomi Williams, no one knew her name at that time, just a black woman, about 50, wearing a light beige jacket, straight pants and her hair neatly tied up. No expensive jewelry, no heavy makeup, but her eyes, bright, intelligent, and deep, made people stop. She did not bow her head like those who were accustomed to being judged. She walked into the first-class cabin with dignity, without hesitation or showiness. Placing her small bag in the overhead compartment, she sat down in seat 1A, next to the window. Lauren Reed, the head flight attendant, quickly walked over. She was in her early 30s, fair-skinned, with a perfect figure, and blonde hair tied back in a bun, the picture of a professional and overconfident flight attendant. She had worked in the airline industry for nearly 10 years, and she believed she could tell at a glance which passenger was in the right class. Lauren looked at Naomi with disapproval. She stood up straight. Her hands in front of her skirt as if trained. "Excuse me, ma'am. First class is reserved for passengers with appropriate tickets only. I think you may be in the wrong compartment." Naomi looked up, not confused, just gently replied, "I sat in my right seat." Lauren tilted her head slightly, her eyes quickly scanning the list in her hand. But instead of checking it carefully, the head flight attendant frowned slightly. "This is seat 1A, priority. I don't see your name on the list." Naomi remained calm, her eyes unwavering. "Then you should check again." The atmosphere became a little awkward. A few passengers turned their heads. Murmurs arose, "She seems lost. Must have gone the wrong way." Lauren was starting to lose patience. She stepped closer, her voice firm. "I ask you to leave this chair immediately, or I will have to ask airport security to intervene." Naomi slowly took the ticket out of her bag and handed it straight to Lauren's face. The paper was clear: name, seat number, ticket class, 1st place, 1A, Naomi Williams. Lauren was confused for a few seconds, then tried to appear calm. "I'm sorry, there must be a little mistake. But are you sure you bought the right ticket?" And then Lauren did the unexpected. She brought her hand down, a slap, straight to Naomi's face. The whole cabin was dead silent. The slap echoed, like a crack in the quiet space of first class. The sound was not loud, but the surprise, the insult, the feeling that something was terribly wrong spread like a cold wind. A few people gasped. Mr. Jonathan Blake put down his newspaper and leaned forward. Mr. and Mrs. Raymond sat perfectly still, eyes wide, hands clasped together. Grace Carter, the young flight attendant, stood nearby, frozen. She saw Lauren's hand swing up, but she couldn't believe it. Her hand was shaking as if she had just been slapped. Naomi said nothing. She touched her cheek, where the imprint of that hand was still visible. No screams. No angry reactions. Just calm, like a stone wall rising slowly out of the water. Lauren began to find the silence more frightening than any scolding. She took a step back, stammering, I didn't mean to. I just thought she. I thought she. The sentence was broken in half. No one responded. Then Naomi stood up. She didn't look at Lauren. Instead, she opened her purse, took out a small black leather wallet, and pulled out a shiny metal card. The card wasn't an ordinary credit card. It had a silver logo and embossed text, Dr. Naomi Williams, President CEO, Polaris Air Corporation. Polaris Air, the air seemed to freeze. Polaris, one of the largest airlines in the United States, was the parent company operating this flight. Naomi held the card out to Lauren, her hand not shaking at all. She said, word for word, I own this airline. And I am on a flight operated by my own company. Everyone was stunned. Grace covered her mouth, eyes wide. Jonathan Blake stood up and walked toward the two women. Miss Stewardess, he said, his voice deep and authoritative, not only have you committed a serious professional error, but you may also face legal action for assaulting a passenger. Lauren was struck by lightning. Her hands were shaking. She didn't dare look up. Naomi said nothing more. She pressed the flight attendant call button. The yellow light turned on. Less than 2 minutes later, a stony-faced security guard entered the first-class cabin. Naomi turned to him, please escort this flight attendant off the plane. I will discuss this with HR after we land. She just assaulted a passenger who she thought did not deserve to be here because of the color of her skin. No one said anything. No explanation needed. No one defended. Lauren bowed her head and followed the security guard. As she left the cabin, she glanced at Naomi one last time. Her face, no longer confident, no longer the air of someone who thought she knew who belonged here. Silence. A deep silence. But no longer cold. But the silence of awakening. Naomi sat back down in seat 1A, as if nothing had happened. She turned to Grace, who was still standing there like a statue. Are you okay? Grace nodded, biting her lip. I saw it all, but I didn't have the courage to do anything. I'm sorry. Naomi smiled slightly. A smile as light as the spring breeze. Not everyone is strong enough to react immediately. But the fact that she did not join in, and dared to stay, was a choice. And sometimes, just standing still in the right place is also an action. Grace choked, eyes red. A moment later, the loudspeaker came on. Flight 612 apologizes for the delay. We will take off as soon as we have completed crew check-in. Thank you for your patience. Naomi looked out the window. The pale yellow afternoon sun shone on the silver wings of the plane. It was a spring day like any other, but not the same anymore. The surrounding passengers began to whisper, but this time it was not with doubt or prejudice. It was with admiration. Is she the CEO? Oh my God, I didn't expect. So calm. I don't know if I could stay calm like that if I got slapped like that. Mr. and Mrs. Raymond turned to Naomi. Mr. Raymond said softly, "I apologize if our actions initially caused you discomfort. We grew up in a different era. But today, I learned a valuable lesson." Naomi looked at him, gently. "It's never too late to start over, man." The engine began to roar. The cabin shook slightly as the wheels left the ground. The Boeing 737 slowly gained altitude. The late afternoon sky was fading, sunlight slanting through the window next to seat 1A, where Naomi was still sitting, silently, in first class. The sound of the engine was steady like a heartbeat. But people's hearts were different. They were still emotionally raw from what had just happened. After calming down, Miss Gray started serving drinks. Her hands were still shaking slightly as she handed the first glass of water to Naomi. Without waiting for the customer to order, she took the initiative to ask, "Would you like tea or coffee?" Naomi looked at her with gentle eyes. "Thank you, hot tea please." "No sugar." Grace nodded and turned away. Naomi kept her thin smile, her hands clasped together in her lap. At that moment, Mr. Jonathan Blake decided to speak up. He leaned over, his eyes on Naomi, his voice low and firm, like an old general. "I apologize for not acting sooner. That slap not only insulted you personally, but also put a stain on all those who sat here and did not speak up." Naomi turned her head and slowly said, "I understand. You weren't the only one who hesitated in that moment. But you stood up, that's what matters." Jonathan was silent for a second, then nodded in agreement. He returned to his chair, but the pang remained. On the other side of the compartment, Mr. and Mrs. Raymond were still sitting close together. Mrs. Raymond whispered in her husband's ear, "I can't stop thinking about it. A black woman, elegant, intelligent, and the owner of an airline. And yet being treated like she doesn't belong here." Mr. Raymond sighed. "We've seen a lot in life, baby. But there are things that should have changed a long time ago." She nodded, her eyes fixed on Naomi. Something inside her, like a part of her past, was being pulled back, forced back. Meanwhile, social media has begun to leak videos. A passenger sitting in the third row filmed almost the entire incident on his phone. The video was quickly shared on Twitter, X, with the caption, "CEO slapped for being black." On domestic flight 612. "Justice needs to speak up." In less than an hour, the video attracted hundreds of thousands of views. One account commented, "This lady handled it well. Calm and strong at the same time. This is the epitome of dignity." Another wrote, "I am 68 years old. And I cried when I watched this video. I thought those days were gone." On the flight, everyone was still trying to digest conflicting feelings, shame for being silent, and gratitude for the wakefulness that had come. Grace returned with a cup of hot tea, gently placing it on Naomi's table. Before leaving, she mustered up all her courage to say, "I really admire you. You don't need to yell or argue. But everyone hears your message. And feels it." Naomi smiled slightly, sipping tea. "The greatest emotion does not come from sound. It comes from action. And truth." Grace stood still for a few seconds, as if trying to memorize every word. Naomi put the cup of tea on the table, tilted her head and asked, "How old are you?" 28, ma'am." Naomi nodded, "You are still very young. You still have plenty of time to choose who you are. Today you stood on the right side, even if you didn't say it. Don't let the world take away that courage." Those words seemed to plant a seed of hope in Grace's heart. She bowed her head and left quietly, but her eyes shone with an inspiration she had never seen on a flight before. The sky outside was starting to turn a coppery orange. The harsh afternoon sun was fading into a patchy veil of clouds. Inside the cabin, the silence was more muted than usual, no more clicking of laptops, no more whispers about stocks, land values, or upcoming conferences. Something had happened that made this flight, from Atlanta to New York, more than just a journey. It had become a confrontation. Naomi remained seated in seat 1A. She neither slept nor read. She looked out the small window as if looking back at herself over the years. Her life, if she had to tell it, was a long journey of overcoming prejudice. Born in the South to a working-class black family, Naomi had to sit at a separate table in the school cafeteria. She had her hand ignored by teachers. She had to walk 3 miles every day to the nearest non-segregated high school. She never forgot the feeling of being rejected for the first time from an aviation club because of internal rules that did not accept non-white members. She cried. But then she read books. She studied constantly. She worked 3 times as hard as everyone else. And step by step, she climbed the ladder, not by favor, but by ability and perseverance, and today, here she sits. Seat 1A. No need to explain, no need to ask permission, she just demands what is right. Respect. The loudspeaker's voice interrupted his train of thought. Dear passengers, we will be serving refreshments in a few minutes. Please turn on your tray table. Grace quickly returned, more steady this time. She served Mr. and Mrs. Raymond first. When she reached Naomi, she paused for a moment. Would you like a chicken sandwich or tuna salad? Naomi smiled softly. Chicken sandwich, thank you. As she turned away, Grace hesitated and then turned back. Madam, I want to ask you something. Naomi tilted her head. Just ask. When you got slapped like that, why are you still so calm? I think I'm going to go crazy. Naomi was silent for a moment and then said, because I know, anger does not change people's hearts. But calmness can force them to look at themselves. I don't need to shout to be heard. I just need to stand firm, so that they have to be silent. Grace stood still, as if hearing something bigger than a career lesson. Something about character. In the back seat, Mr. Raymond spoke up. Mrs. Naomi. She turned back, gently. Yes, sir. He took a deep breath. My wife and I thought we were born into a time when racism was the norm. I'm not proud of it. But I've never stood up against it either. He turned to hold his wife's hand. But today, seeing you, I think, maybe I owe a lot of people an apology. And I start with you. Sorry for our silence, from the past until now. Naomi nodded, saying nothing at once. Then she placed her hand on his. I accept your apology. And I believe that only when we dare to look back can we move forward, not alone, but together. No one said anything. But the atmosphere in the cabin suddenly lightened. As if the sun had just returned after a storm, the whispering started again. But this time it wasn't gossip, it was admiration, respect, and a little self-questioning. The plane was flying steadily at over 30,000 feet, cutting through the pale gray clouds. The sunset fell across the American sky like a pale orange wool blanket over the fields, towns, and cities below. Stories like this that are usually overlooked, but today, were the center of attention. Naomi remained silent, her hands folded on her knees, her eyes fixed on the window. She seemed to be considering something. After a moment, she stood up. The entire compartment seemed to come to automatic attention. She didn't need to tap her spoon against her glass like at a fancy party. She just stood there, straight, neat, her eyes strong but not cold. And then she spoke, loud enough, resonant enough. I would like to ask your permission for a few minutes. Silent, no one interrupted. No one seemed annoyed. I know, what happened before the plane took off is not normal. It is not what I wanted. But it is not uncommon for me. For many people with skin like mine. For many women who have been underestimated because of their appearance, gender, or where they come from. Naomi paused for a moment, her eyes scanning each passenger, from Mr. Blake to Miss Grace, from Mr. and Mrs. Raymond to the young man live streaming under his jacket. I am not here to complain. I am not looking for sympathy. I am simply a reminder that everyone around us has a story. And they deserve to be treated with respect, not because of their status, title, or wealth, but simply because they are human beings. The seats creaked slightly. A few passengers nodded. Grace clasped her hands together as if trying to hold back tears. Naomi continued, I didn't fire anyone out of anger. I just practiced what my company has always emphasized, responsibility. No one has the right to hurt others and then hide behind the words, unintentional. No one has the right to slap someone's dignity and then expect everything to go back to normal. That saying resonates deeply with listeners, especially the older generation, those who witnessed or experienced the days when segregation was the law, without exception. Naomi breathed lightly, then smiled gently. I also want to thank those who were silent, but not complicit. Those who did not act, but recognized the line between right and wrong. And especially, thank you to those who stood up. Her eyes turned to Mr. Jonathan. Justice does not need to be loud. It just needs the right time, and the right person. Mr. Jonathan nodded slowly, looking at her with respect. Naomi finished her speech. I will personally direct a new anti-discrimination training program for all Polaris Air employees. Not just for today, but for the future, where everyone, no matter where they sit, feels equally welcome. Then she sat down. There was a long silence, not uncomfortable, not forced. Just thoughtful. Then there was a burst of applause. It was Mr. Raymond. Still holding his wife's hand, he patted it gently, slowly but firmly. Mrs. Raymond followed, then Jonathan, then the whole compartment, a round of applause. No one was forced. No one was incited. But everyone clapped, as if that was the only way to express, I understand. And I support. Grace turned away to wipe her eyes, pretending to adjust the water tray. The atmosphere seemed to have shed a century of weight, layers of prejudice from the past. Today, at least on this flight, people looked at each other differently. When the applause died down, the first-class cabin of Flight 612 seemed to take on a completely new air. No longer was it the formal indifference of successful people, no longer was it the scrutiny of dress sense or skin color. Instead, there was a quiet empathy, an emotion that only appears when one realizes. Then the plane began to descend. The announcement from the cockpit rang out, we will be landing at John F. Kennedy International Airport in 15 minutes. It is 52 degrees outside in New York. Thank you for flying with us. Passengers began to pack their bags and buckle their seatbelts. Some looked at Naomi, as if to say something, but then just bowed their heads. That silent respect spoke louder than any flattering words. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. The wings shook slightly. The plane landed, the wheels hit the tarmac with a familiar sound. For millions of Americans, it is the sound of arrival, of work, of reunion, of busyness. But today, it is also the sound of a message being delivered, high up in the sky. Where it seems no one has to think about distinctions, the door opened. Passengers stood up one by one to get their luggage. When it was Naomi's turn, Mr. Raymond touched her lightly on the shoulder. My wife and I would love to buy you a cup of coffee if we could. We'd love to hear more about your journey. And if you don't mind, I'd like my children and grandchildren to hear it, from you. Naomi smiled, I would be happy to. But the important thing is, you tell them. By living. Not just by words. Mr. Raymond nodded, his hand squeezing his wife's tighter. She stepped off the plane, no bodyguards, no escort. Just a woman of color, walking down the hallway of JFK Airport. Her back straight, her hair still tied back, her eyes still calm, and behind her, the online world was in turmoil. On television, the news anchor opened the evening program, a shocking incident on a Polaris Air commercial flight. The CEO was attacked by the chief flight attendant because he was suspected of not belonging in first class. Below the video replay of Naomi drawing the card, is the comment line, Naomi Williams doesn't just fly through the sky. She flies through prejudice, and lands with dignity. New York, 6:42 p.m., same day, in the JFK Airport VIP lounge, Dr. Naomi Williams sat quietly in a corner. The cup of black coffee in front of her had long since gone cold, but she had not yet taken a sip. The phone in front of her was constantly lighting up, notifications, texts, calls, emails. All about the same thing, the video, on social media, the video of Naomi being slapped and the way she handled the situation has gone viral. Spread across America in just a few hours. People don't just watch. People share. Comment, debate, and think. CNN News Channel included the incident in a special report. Black passenger slapped on Polaris flight, turns out to be CEO of airline. A slap that wakes up the nation. Fox News offers a different perspective, but does not deny the influence. CEO responds calmly to alleged discrimination. Does America need more people like her? Naomi opened her phone and saw an email from her legal team. They were asking for confirmation so they could make an official statement. But she didn't respond right away. She didn't want this to be a temporary scandal that would fade into oblivion like so many others. She wanted something lasting. A real change. Elsewhere, at home in Texas, George Holloway, 74, a veteran of the civil rights movement in the 1960s, was sitting with his wife in front of an old TV in the living room. He picked up the remote, changing the channel from sports to news. When he saw Naomi on the screen, he put the remote down on the table, speechless. Look, he said to his wife. It's like 1965. But this time in the sky. The wife nodded, her eyes wet, but she didn't smash. She stood still. And the whole compartment had to change. Mr. George pondered for a moment and then said, maybe. It's time we wrote a letter to Congress. About aviation retraining. And things deeper than that. The next morning, Polaris Air headquarters, New York City, the board of directors called an emergency meeting. Dozens of reporters waited outside the headquarters. Naomi walked into the meeting room, looking familiar, a simple gray suit, no makeup, her hair still neatly tied at the nape of her neck. The assistant whispered in her ear. NBC and CBS both asked her to speak. They said she was being called first-class woman. The phrase is all over social media. Naomi smiled slightly and shook her head. I don't need a title. I need a commitment. Back in the cabin, after the domino effect. Many passengers who were on Flight 612 began writing blog posts, Facebook posts, and sharing their experiences. A man named Ken Myers, 61 years old, writes, I used to think I wasn't racist. But that day, I kept quiet. And now I understand, silence in the face of injustice is also a form of acceptance of it. Thank you, Naomi, for waking me up. A 20-year-old white female college student wrote, I cried when I watched the video. I thought America was better. But maybe there are still many things to fix. And I start with myself. At a cozy press conference 3 days later, Naomi appears not as a CEO, but as a woman sharing a real story. She started from the beginning, without any hesitation. But instead of focusing on the part where she was slapped, she spent a lot of time talking about Grace. The young flight attendant did not go along with the mistake, even with her eyes. Change does not come from the leaders. It comes from young people who know right from wrong, and have the courage to stand up for what is right, even if it is just with a look, or a silent gesture. We cannot ask the world to change, if we do not teach young people to preserve dignity for others. The whole audience stood up and applauded. New York, Polaris Air headquarters, the third day after the incident. In the large glass conference room on the 18th floor, the CEO, department heads, and the legal department were all present. Everyone's face was tense. On the big screen, a constant stream of data was running: customer feedback, media statistics, stock performance. An assistant said, in the last 72 hours alone, Polaris Air has received more than 300,000 social media mentions, a 4,000% increase. But we've also received nearly 11,000 emails asking for clarification on our employee training policy. A marketing manager chimed in. The overall reaction was positive. They admired Naomi's response. But they also wanted to know, what will the company do next? Naomi sat at the head of the table, calmly watching everyone. Then she said, slowly but firmly, we are not going to make a soulless statement. We are going to take action. And take action in front of the cameras. The room was silent. I want every new flight attendant, even the cleaners, to go through an intensive training program on respecting diversity and respecting passengers. Not 1 hour. 1 week. And not to cope, to understand. A CFO asked cautiously, the cost for such a system would be huge. Naomi looked at him. The cost of rebuilding trust is always great. But the cost of losing it is much greater. No one said anything more. The plan was approved within 15 minutes. The next morning, across America, the morning news kept mentioning 2 words: Polaris Pledge, Polaris Commitment. CBS Morning News ran the headline: First airline to implement mandatory anti-bias training, system-wide, nationwide. The New York Times published an editorial with the headline, not just a slap in the face, but a wake-up call for the industry. Other airlines are starting to feel the pressure. United Airlines, Delta, and American Airlines all issued statements saying they were reviewing internal policies. An awakening begins. At a flight crew training center in Houston, Texas, Grace Carter, the young flight attendant who had stood silently that day, was invited to be a facilitator for the new training program. No one expected that the shy girl would become an inspiration to new generations of flight attendants. A small class, 18 people, was listening to Grace tell, I stood there. I saw what happened. And I did nothing. But that moment changed me. From then on, I was no longer silent. She paused for a moment, then continued, I don't tell this story to be admired. I tell it to remind you, you don't have to be a CEO to do the right thing. You just have to have a heart that's not cold. An Asian guy sitting in the front row turned to his seatmate and whispered, this is the first training session that I feel is not meaningless. The whole class was silent as if to absorb that. Meanwhile, Naomi receives a handwritten letter, sent from far away, Montgomery, Alabama, where she was born. The short letter, written in old handwriting, Dear Naomi. I'm the teacher who wouldn't let you join the high school aviation club, just because you were black. I was wrong. I didn't dare say it in front of you when I was teaching. But after what you did, I felt the need to say it. You make me believe that there are students who teach their own teachers. If possible, please forgive me. Naomi read the last line, her eyes suddenly blurred. She folded the letter and placed it in the drawer where she kept her most important mementos. No need to post it online. No need to put it in the news. But for her, it was a quiet and sacred victory. Washington, D.C., Capitol Hill, 2 weeks after the incident, the whole country is waiting for a rare hearing. The Senate Aviation and Transportation Committee invites Dr. Naomi Williams, CEO of Polaris Air, came to testify. From national television to independent YouTube channels, millions of Americans, especially older generations, watched closely. Not because they expected a fiery grilling, but because they wanted to hear her speak. With composure. With dignity, inside the hearing room, Naomi stepped into the flashbulbs. No fanfare, her hair still neatly tied back, her elegant gray suit. She stood before the microphone, no paper, no teleprompter. Just memory and truth. Her voice rang out, each word clear. I'm not here to talk about being slapped. I'm here to talk about thousands of other passengers of color, men, women, young, old, who have been treated as if they don't belong in that compartment. Don't belong in that row, don't belong in this country. But they sat down, and they endured it. The tapping of the pen stopped. The whole room held its breath, and I sit here today. Not because I am a CEO. But because I am a daughter of America. Someone who knows that justice comes not from titles, but from consistent action. She recounted the moment on the plane, in detail, without venom. She mentioned Grace, Raymond, Lauren, not to condemn, but to show that everyone has a chance to make amends. Then she said, I'm not asking you to write more laws. I'm asking you to make the laws that already exist actually work. No one should be judged by the color of their skin when buying an airline ticket. Applause broke out from the once solemn crowd. The Georgia senator, a 68-year-old veteran, stood up. Took the microphone. Ms. Williams, with all due respect, today you reminded me of Martin Luther King's speech in 1963. And you said what he wanted to say, but from a place he never expected, first class. Naomi bowed her head, eyes filled with tears. Across America, people are talking. At a small cafe in Lubbock, Texas, Mrs. Ethel, 81 years old, sat with her granddaughter. She was speechless when she saw Naomi on TV. That girl is just like Marianne, my best friend from school. Mary was once expelled from class just because she wore an old shirt. I wish Mary was alive to see this. The niece asked, Mrs. Ethel, do you think America is getting better? Mrs. Ethel took her grandchild's hand. Better, but not enough. But if people like Naomi continue to stand up, then there is hope. At a Baptist church in Montgomery, where Martin Luther King once preached, the elderly pastor, now 82 years old, read a passage from Matthew 5 verse 9, Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Then he held up the newspaper with Naomi's picture. Peace is not just sitting still. Peace is speaking the truth. And today, a woman spoke the truth on an airplane. The church stood. They didn't clap. They bowed their heads. There was a solemn silence, like they had heard about Rosa Parks. A small airline in Kansas announced it would join the Polaris training program. Many universities have begun teaching the Naomi case as a case study in leadership with integrity. Some older white people wrote her handwritten letters. Naomi, I used to be quiet. Now I'm learning to stand up, thanks. I'm 73. And she makes me believe that age is no limit to changing your mind. Naomi returns to her home in New York after the hearing. She did not speak further, nor did she hold a press conference. She just sat by the window, with her son, a senior sociology student. He asked, Mom, if I were on that plane, should I stand up? Naomi looked at her son and replied, you don't have to stand up and shout. But never sit still when something is wrong. Even if it's just a glance to say, I disagree. That is enough to start a change. 1 week after the hearing, Naomi woke up one peaceful morning, about to enjoy her usual cup of coffee, when a newspaper headline caught her eye: Polaris CEO called a hypocrite, dividing the country. Independent Weekly: why is such a small incident being made such a big deal? Quoted a former MP on conservative radio: this is not racism, this is misunderstanding. Quote from a famous blogger: Naomi put the newspaper down. Breathing slowly, on social media, a wave of #overreaction began to emerge. Comments like, I was once told the wrong place by a flight attendant, no one filmed it for me. Is she really a victim? Maybe she used her power to get revenge. Some extremist TV channels even reported with sarcasm. Is it now possible to bring the whole country to its knees every time someone feels offended? Naomi did not answer immediately, she did not respond in the press. She did not hold a press conference in response, instead, she chose to dot back to work. Internal meetings. Meeting with employees. Talking with young pilots. At a meeting in the Dallas office, an engineer asked her, are you worried? If those reactions affect the stock. Naomi looked at him, calmly, if I change my principles just to keep the stock price up, then I don't deserve to lead. And if my company can't stand up to headwinds, then it never was. Not everyone in Polaris supported her, however, some longtime employees quietly left. Some shareholders sent letters asking for restrictions on political speech. An internal meeting took place in a tense atmosphere. A vice president, with a cold face, said bluntly, we are an airline, not a social movement. Naomi did not interrupt. She waited for him to finish, then replied, you're wrong. We are people before we are companies. And any organization that flies in the skies of America has a responsibility to reflect that country. There was silence for a few seconds. Then another director nodded, I think. You're right. On television, she remained silent. But a local station in Jackson, Mississippi suddenly replayed an old clip, from 2011. In it, Naomi, then just the operations director, answered the reporter, I know I'm a woman of color in a white male-dominated airline industry. But I don't need anyone to give up their seat. I just need them to not take it away from me. Clip immediately viral again. A wave of people, even those who had doubted her, began to turn around and support her. The famous talk show, Voices of the Nation, invited her to participate. The host is a middle-aged white man, ex-military, straightforward, sometimes harsh. He asked, do you think you are pushing the country into further polarization? Naomi replied, I'm not pushing America anywhere. I'm just looking in a mirror. If people see division in it, that's the truth, it's not the mirror's fault. Host was silent for a few seconds. Then smiled, I don't agree with everything you say. But I respect you for not running away. The audience in the studio applauded. Elsewhere, in a small rural area in Arkansas, a 67-year-old white man who voted for a conservative candidate was watching the show with his granddaughter. He said slowly, she's not like those people screaming online. She's calm. And she's not asking for love, just respect. Which is true. Dallas, Texas, Love Field Airport, 6:45 a.m., Naomi had just taken an internal flight from Houston. She didn't usually travel alone, but this morning, no assistant, no chaperone. Just a business trip, in the truest sense of the word. While waiting for the car to pick her up, she stopped at a small cafe in the lobby. She chose a table near the glass door and ordered a cup of black coffee as usual. While she was waiting, an older man, about 70, approached, holding a baseball cap embroidered with the words USAF veteran. He stood still for a few seconds before speaking. "Are you Naomi Williams?" Naomi looked at him and nodded slightly. The man pulled an envelope from his coat pocket. Trembling, without looking at her, he placed the envelope on the table. "I have written this letter twice. Once in anger. Once in truth. I think the second time is worth reading." Then he turned and walked away, limping like a veteran. Naomi opened the envelope. The blue ink was rough but neat. "Dear Mrs. Williams, I was one of those who wrote comments against you. I thought you were overreacting. That you were using your power to get even. I even shared the clip with harsh words, but then my wife, a retired nurse, sat me down and watched the original video. The whole 4 minutes, without cuts. I don't see a powerful woman. I see someone who has been humiliated, and still stands. I saw my own granddaughter in her. She was 15 years old, brown, adopted. And I knew, if someone ever treated her like that, I would not stay silent, and I see myself in the silence of others. I don't need your forgiveness. But I need to forgive myself. Thank you for not reacting like I did. Thank you for not breaking things, but making us look again." Naomi folded the letter. She didn't cry. But she sat there for a few more minutes, silent. Her coffee grew cold, as it always did. Same day, at a small airport in Des Moines, Iowa, Grace Carter, a former flight attendant and now an in-house trainer, was waiting for her flight back to New York after training. A black girl of about 10 ran past with a model airplane in her hand. Her eyes were shining. The little girl accidentally bumped into Grace and turned back politely. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean it." Grace smiled and sat down at his level. "It's okay. Do you like planes?" "Yes. I want to be a pilot. But my mother said, few people like me can do it." Grace looked at her. "It's not because of the color of your skin, right?" The girl hesitated, then nodded. Grace opened her phone and found an old photo of Naomi Williams standing in the cabin with the caption, "We all have the right to fly." "Do you see this person?" "Yes. I saw her on TikTok. She is very famous." "She is not famous because she is beautiful or rich. She is famous because she does not let anyone tell her, 'You do not belong here.'" Grace reached out and stroked her head. "If anyone says that to you, just remember this: they don't have the right to decide your flight path." The girl smiled. She ran. The model plane in her hand was raised higher than before. In a quiet neighborhood in Charleston, South Carolina, a church class was holding a special session for seniors, ages 65 to 90. They showed a video of Naomi speaking in Parliament, then discussed it. An 82-year-old woman with white hair and a weak voice said, "I used to ride the bus with Rosa Parks. I never dared to stand up. But this time, I wrote a letter of support for Naomi. I mailed it. My handwriting is bad, but my heart is true." Someone in the group whispered, "Honesty is always enough." At Naomi's office, late evening, she sat down to review a new campaign outline, "Fly with Dignity, Focus on Educating in Aviation." No flashy images. No fancy slogans, just one sentence: "We don't have to be the same, to respect each other." Naomi pressed approve. She stood up and turned off the light. Before leaving the office, she paused at a photograph on the wall, a young woman, wearing a flight attendant's uniform in 1972, her mother. Naomi gently touched the photo frame and whispered, "Mom, I think America is starting to listen." 3 months after the Flight 612 incident, New York City, no more television cameras. No more sensational headlines. Life at Polaris Air headquarters is back to normal, or at least, a new version of normal. Naomi Williams walked into her office for the last time as CEO. On her desk was her resignation letter, not emailed, but handwritten, as she always did when something was really important. Why? Not because of pressure. Not because of opposition. But because she believed. When the mission is accomplished, a good leader should step back and let others take over. At a small, internal company farewell party, no champagne. No flashy banners. Just a warm, brightly lit room filled with employees of all generations and ethnicities, from floor cleaners to veteran pilots. Naomi stepped up to the podium and looked at everyone. I didn't leave because I was tired. I left because I believed. I believe that today, Polaris is different from yesterday. Not perfect. But no longer closing our eyes to injustice. She turned to Grace Carter, now head of multicultural training. Grace, from now on everyone will look at you. Not because of your title. But because you chose not to be silent. Grace burst into tears, but stood up straight. I will not let you down. The next day, Naomi left New York. Not to retire, but to return to the small cabin in the Texas suburbs where her mother had lived. She brought no trophies, no medals. She only brought a suitcase, a thick notebook filled with hundreds of letters, from people who had never met her, but had been changed by her. At her old high school in Montgomery, where Naomi was rejected from the aviation club in 1987, a naming ceremony for the new stadium is taking place, Williams Field, as suggested by the alumni community. The principal reads the letter Naomi sent from Texas. I don't need my name carved on the wall. I just want the students here not to have to prove their worth just because they are different. If they have a dream, they don't need permission. On Capitol Hill, a bill called the Passenger Dignity Act was proposed, not loud, not argumentative. But enough to get attention. A 74-year-old senator said, if one woman can change the airline industry with her dignified silence, this Congress can change it with one simple act, listening. The bill doesn't just propose employee training. It also requires companies to be more transparent when dealing with discrimination incidents. At a small bookstore in Austin, Texas, where Naomi began writing her memoir, not to sell. Not to make money. Just to leave a legacy for the next generation. She writes in the introduction, I don't win. I just walk through the door at the right time. And when the door opens, I don't walk in alone. I leave it open, for others to follow. One fall day, at DFW International Airport, a young girl, brown skin, natural curly hair, stepped onto the plane with a bright smile. Her seat was 2A, first class. The flight attendant greeted her with a friendly look. Hello, miss. Your seat is the best seat today. The girl smiled, thank you. My grandmother used to say, if anyone asks why you are sitting here, just say, because this seat is for you. The flight attendant nodded. Who is your aunt? The girl opened her wallet and quietly pulled out an old photo. Naomi Williams standing in front of the cockpit, her eyes calm, the sky wide open behind her. She's not very famous. But to me, she's the doorkeeper. How about you? After listening to this touching story, we wanted to know, how do you feel? Have you ever witnessed or experienced a similar situation, where people are judged simply because of their appearance, skin color, or past? Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. Every story, every experience has power. Change the way other people see the world. If you believe that respect, dignity, and compassion are values worth spreading, don't hesitate. Click the like button, share this video with people you believe need to hear it. and don't forget subscribe to channel to continue to accompany us through inspiring stories like this. Thank you for your time. See you in the next story, where kindness always has wings, and justice always flies.